Hello, and thank you so much for tuning in to the very first installment of Dupe-It-Yourself, the series where we ask the question, can we dupe it? And the answer is always yes. So today's palette is going to be the Lime Crime Venus Immortalis palette. I thought that this palette was absolutely beautiful when I first saw it, and since we've been inundated with warm tone palettes over the last several years, it's nice to finally see some cool tone palettes sprinkling their way into what I still feel like is mostly a warm tone dominated palette field or palette selection. But I do feel like out of all of the cool tone smoky palettes that I have seen lately from brands, this one is the one that has caught my eye the most. Two problems though. I don't purchase from Lime Crime anymore, and even if I did, or even if this was from a different brand, this is a palette with 8 shades, and 3 of the shades in there just really won't work for my skin tone. One of them is a stark white matte shade, and honestly, out of the 3, that's the one that I would at least probably use from time to time, because sometimes white mattes can come in to be useful, but the 2 flesh tone shades in there are not my flesh tone, if you get what I mean. So I would have no use for those shades really, and bringing in a palette into my collection, no matter the cost or whatever the case may be, with 8 shades and I can't use almost half of those shades, that's just not something I'm really willing to do anymore. So I went ahead and decided to dupe the palette using shades from my own collection, and of course adjusting some of the tones in there to suit my skin tone a little bit better, and this is what I came up with. So I think I did a pretty good job, if I do say so myself. And the shades in here are from across 3 different brands: Sydney Grace Co., Devinah Cosmetics, and Anastasia Beverly Hills. And the 2 shades that I have from Anastasia Beverly Hills, which are these 2 right here, I only put those in here because I needed 2 of those, again, lighter sort of fleshy tone shades, but ones that would work for my skin tone. And I don't have a ton of those types of shades. I actually don't really have any of those shades from more recent brands that I purchased from. So Sydney Grace and Devinah Cosmetics are 2 more recent brands in my collection. I've only been buying eyeshadows from them over the past couple of years, whereas Anastasia Beverly Hills is one of the brands that is I think one of the first single eyeshadow brands that I purchased from. So because I don't tend to use lighter tone eyeshadows that much, I don't tend to buy them from brands anymore, but I do have, you know, the staple ones that I feel like I need from a lot of brands that I purchased from earlier on, like Anastasia Beverly Hills, because I feel like if you really were shopping just on the Devinah or Sydney Grace website, you could find tones that are similar to these, so that way, you know, you wouldn't have to, you know, go to 3 different sites or try to shop from 3 different brands to kind of recreate something similar to this. I know that Devinah and Sydney Grace both have shades similar to these. It's just that I don't own those types of shades because those aren't the type of shades that I'm looking for. And actually, I feel like I do have a shade from Devinah that's kind of similar to this called LAKEY, if I'm not mistaken, except that one is a little bit deeper and richer than this one. But yeah, overall, I think that you can get these types of tones from Sydney Grace or Devinah if you're looking into buying cool tone shades. And I definitely feel like I was able to get all of the shades that I needed from Sydney Grace and Devinah, aside from those 2, because Devinah and Sydney Grace both have a really wide selection of cool tone shades, like both brands. I think Sydney Grace has a lot of cool tone shimmers as well as some cool tone mattes, and Devinah has a ton of cool tone matte shades. So I would definitely check them out if you are particularly interested in getting some interesting cool tone shadows. And then the actual palette that I'm housing these in case you are curious, is actually from Devinah Cosmetics as well. It's this beautiful holographic palette, and I think these retail for $12, but they're often on sale on the website for $10. And that was another thing too about the Lime Crime palette, is that it was absolutely stunning to me, but I just, you know, obviously wasn't going to buy it, but you know, it makes up for it a little bit that I have this kind of like really pretty packaging to house my sort of dupe palette in, so that I can, you know, replicate the feeling of having something new and nice and pretty in my own collection. So let's go through all of the shades. So the first shade I have here is Officer. This is from Sydney Grace, and this is a really nice cool tone gray. I mean, I guess technically all grays are cool tone perhaps, but this one is very cool, and it has sort of like a purpley undertone to it as well, which is what I felt like the gray in the Lime Crime palette kind of looked like. And Sydney Grace's mattes are absolutely excellent, so I would highly suggest them if you haven't checked them out. They are kind of powdery, but they're very pigmented, and I find that they blend really easily as well. The next shade I have here is the shade Glitz, and this is from Devinah Cosmetics. And this is actually one of my favorite metallic shades from them. This one comes in handy quite a bit when I'm doing my own custom palettes, because it's like this neutral tone white gold shade, and you would think that gold being as common of a color as it is, that, you know, oh, it would be really easy to find like an icy kind of like light gold color, and I feel like I don't really have a lot of those. This is like one of the only sort of like super neutral golds that I have in my collection, so this comes in handy quite a bit, and it's a beautiful shade. This one's a little bit flakier than some of their metallic shades, but it provides an excellent amount of sheen, and as long as you're applying this on top of, I would say, at least a tacky primer. It doesn't have to be like a glitter glue or anything super heavy duty like that, but as long as you're applying it on top of some sort of tacky base, you should be fine. You shouldn't experience any fallout. And again, beautiful shade, super reflective, as you can see. The next shade that I have here is Dusty Rose from Anastasia Beverly Hills, and I believe they've used this shade in quite a few palettes, so if you own some Anastasia Beverly Hills palettes, you might already have this color lurking around in your collection. And I feel like this is about as light as I can go for a sort of pink toned shade, which is kind of what the shade in the Lime Crime palette looks like, for it to be useful on my skin tone. So I actually use this as a transition color. It does look a little bit light even to use as a transition color for me, but I find that this does kind of blend out to be a little bit darker, again, especially if you're blending on top of a base that's a little bit tacky. You know, not super tacky, because I know sometimes with matte shades that can be, you know, a major problem, but I find that, you know, on top of a lightly tacky base, that this blends out to be a little bit darker, and it works perfectly for the purpose of using as a transition shade on my skin tone. The next shade in here is called Esme. This is from Devinah Cosmetics, and this is that dusty lavender shade that I was talking about, and it's a very interesting shade, and I think it would have been cool if Lime Crime would have put a color like this in the palette, because for this palette to be so interesting, the matte white, the inclusion of a matte white seemed a little bit blah, but anyways, that's Esme. I really like it, and as you can see, it definitely has like a muted tone to it, so even though it's like a purple lavender color, it kind of looks muted and almost gray, which kind of goes with the theme of the rest of the palette. And Devinah is great for doing these shades, so again, if you want sort of like really interesting but like muted colors, definitely check out their offerings. Okay, moving into the next row, we have Nemesis by Devinah Cosmetics, and this is a sort of a plum color. And this one I think actually took me the longest to find one that I thought matched suitably with the shade in the palette. I had a couple that I could have pulled from Anastasia Beverly Hills as well, since I had already pulled a few from Anastasia Beverly Hills. But since again I wanted to just focus on Sydney Grace and Devinah, I decided to pull this, and I think that this matches pretty well with the shade as it appears in the palette. So that again is Nemesis. The next shade I have is Thunderbird, and this is from Sydney Grace. And initially I thought that this shade in the palette I would have the hardest time duping, because in the actual promotional images of the palette, or it could have just been, I don't know, somebody's picture of the palette, it looked more like this was a blue shade, like a dusty, like slate blue. But then as I started to see more and more pictures of it, it really looked more like a gray with maybe a slightly blue tinge. But even as I started to see more pictures, it looked more gray than blue. So I picked this shade Thunderbird because it is a sort of blue tinged gray that I have. But I feel like this is actually, again, based on swatches that I've seen now from the palette, this to me looks a little bit more blue than what I have seen from the actual palette itself. But I decided to keep the shade in because I actually really like the fact that this has a blue tinge to it. Again, I think that that's part of what made the palette so interesting looking, is that you had these cool tone shades that like lean towards gray but kind of look like they had these differing undertones to them. So that's Thunderbird, a really amazing and interesting blue tone gray. The next shade I have is Tiara, which is from Sydney Grace Co. And I have said this before, but I feel like people kind of sleep on Sydney Grace's pressed pigment formula, because everybody raves about the matte formula, but their pressed pigments are stunning. I mean, look at that. That is so metallic, like so bright. It is incredibly bright, incredibly reflective, and a really interesting tone as well. Like it's kind of like a neutral mix of a taupe and silver. So I really like this shade. I think it's beautiful and I would recommend it. Last but not least, we have the shade Warm Taupe, which is by Anastasia Beverly Hills. Undeniably the most boring shade in the palette, but this has actually been quite a staple for me, and I even have quite a bit of a dip going in there. Again, I think this is one that they have featured in quite a few palettes, so if you have some Anastasia palettes, you might have this shade laying around already. But it's just this beautiful, light, taupey brown color with just enough brown in it that I think that's what makes it look really nice on my skin tone, even though it is a lighter shade. So I really enjoy that one, and again, it's one that I would actually be able to use. I also did use this palette to complete the look that I am wearing today, so I'll just kind of quickly go through the shades that I used to complete this look. So I went in first with the shade Dusty Rose, and this was my transition shade, so I just kind of blended this out, and again, it turns to a much deeper, richer color if you blend this out kind of over a tacky base. So that's kind of what I would recommend if you have a deeper skin tone and you want to use a color like this for your transition. And then I went in with Esme, this lightest shade in the inner third of my lid, to do the kind of gradient that you see going on. Then I have this shade here, Thunderbird from Sydney Grace, in the middle. I think that that's like the feature shade of the look. So my look kind of seems very blue tinged. That is definitely due to this shade. And then I have the shade Officer as my outer V shade, completing sort of the shades that I have on my lid. Then on my lower lash line, I just have Nemesis, and I just literally smudge this all across the entire lower lash line. And then I have Tiara on my inner corner. So I used this palette in its entirety to complete this look. And well, not all the shades in here, but I used only this palette to create the look that I have on now. And the only shades that I didn't use from the palette are Glitz and Warm Taupe. But I definitely want to keep these colors together because I do really like this color scheme together. And I'm even thinking that I could use, you know, some of the lighter tones to create some really nice cool tone looks for work. But yeah, this is definitely a color scheme that I want to continue playing with. So even though I won't be purchasing the Lime Crime palette, I am really happy to have seen it, to have been inspired by it, to kind of put these shades together. So that is the end of my first Dupe It Yourself video. I can see me doing a ton of these in the future because I see a lot of palettes on the market that I am interested in, but maybe there's a couple of things that are off, or maybe it's a brand that I don't purchase from, etc, etc. So I did enjoy doing this. I will definitely do more of these in the future, and please feel free to give this video a thumbs up if you found it enjoyable and or helpful, and subscribe for like content. But either way, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.